Okay, let's talk about peptides. Um, I still think that like the calling these drugs peptides is so funny to me because it's kind of like I don't know, it's like talking about like a kind of car and having that stand for all cars and just like constantly saying, "Oh, what SUV do you drive?" Like I don't drive an SUV. I drive a coupe, and it's like no, that's an SUV. I love SUVs. It's just sort of this like it immediately whenever I hear the word peptide used that way, it just immediately to me is like, oh, this person's retarded. They don't know. They don't know. That's my immediate reaction to anybody who uses the word peptide to not mean a short protein with 40 or less amino acids. That's to me the sure sign of somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about, or just I don't know why people want to LARP as doctors or pharmaceutical people. Like why? What's the point? Um, I don't LARP as a mechanic. I don't know how to even drive a car, let alone look at an engine and decide how to fix it. Why would somebody want to LARP as that? I really understand the six pistons in this car. The carburetor is not connected to the vibrator. That's just a silly kind of thing to want to do. And I think, from my perspective, like it's okay to just say, "Hey, I went to my doctor. He said I was fine." But I think people who want to sort of take that to the next level and say that, oh, well, I I want to be even healthier or something like that. And happy to debate. I'm going to tweet it again. But I think that this desire to want to be doctor, to want to play doctors, is kind of the what's interesting about that is the psychological aspects to it. Why do people want to be biohackers? Why do people want to be, I guess, like drug hunters when they're not sick? That's kind of the strangest thing to me. If I had Pompe disease or Fabry disease or something like that, I'd be hunting all around the world for drugs that have been abandoned or potentially work or whatever. And people do that in those diseases, and you can't blame them. I think some people here know some of those, like, what do people take cyclodextrin for Niemann-Pick, I think. There's like a whole bunch of these where I think even people took tadalafil for ATTR, and that sort of did work, or one of the tafamidis or sort of derivatives. And sometimes a motivated rare disease community can go find things that could be helpful for them. But again, there's problems with purity and so forth, and you'll never know about the efficacy. So for people to do this when they're healthy, to me, it just boggles my mind, because there isn't really, a better state than healthy. Could you be super healthy? Maybe. It's a really bizarre thing to want to do. And then bodybuilders, are kind of in a class of their own. Like, these are people that want to, um, achieve certain aesthetic goals, and that's perfectly fine. But I think we can, and to some extent, exclude bodybuilders from the equation, because they're not exactly your, large population. We all want to be fit, I suppose, but hi, Ty.
Yeah, hello. I had a question regarding peptides.
You have a very deep voice, Ty.
Oh, thank you. Are peptides safe for black people?
I think they're safe for everybody.
Because
Okay. Still a lot of weirdos on the internet. Um, Good to know. Good to know. Um, uh, so yeah, I don't know if anybody wants to debate. I'm here, but I feel like I mean, I think that the there's the debate I just had. There's a lot of projection as to like what people out there actually want, and I don't think many people actually do want to play doctor for themselves. Um, I think that the average like affluent male in SF or New York has heard about people who do this, but it's still too enterprising for most. I think it's like less than 1%, very much less than 1% of people are interested in this.
What about pharma companies
What
looking
about
into peptide therapies? There's at least one pharma company being interested into the modality, whether it's aesthetics or
wait,
immunology.
you are you asking if drug companies make peptides?
How do you feel about it, or how does the crowd feel about it? Since there's at least one pharma company, big pharma company, that's looking into that specific modality
Drug
to develop.
companies drug companies have been making peptides for 80 years, bro.
Yeah, so why is that an issue now? Are you talking
It's
about like gray
not.
market?
Yeah, I mean, peptides are one of the weaker classes of drugs. They have very little stability, very little half life. So sometimes they can be used as like immediate release hormones, or they require some reengineering. But peptides have always been kind of the backwater of pharma for a reason. Yeah, we're mostly talking about when people use the word peptides, they don't mean its actual meaning. They're sort of just talking about drugs that are either not approved or available off, in the gray market. But yeah, drug companies, I mean, peptides are just small proteins, and proteins have been around for a long time as well, whether they're animal derived in the early days or synthetically created. That sort of started in the 70s with Genentech creating recombinant insulin. But peptides were solid state synthesized, I think, going back as far as the 60s and 70s. So yeah, I mean, this making amino acid, faithful amino acid replications of peptide hormones has been something that has been around forever. Vasopressin, ADH, HGH is a protein that has to be made in bacteria, but like, even insulin is made in bacteria now, but there are plenty of other peptides that are, 10, 15, 20 amino acids that are made by solid state synthesis. But they're to me, to a guy in medicine, the only thing that is different between a peptide and a protein is the facility of synthesis, perhaps the folding, but even that sort of like line blurs with most insulins being created in E. coli. That's kind of another thing here. So in any event, I mean, I think the counterfeiting and taking drugs that are unapproved, it's just a little bit crazy to me.
Can I ask a question, Martin?
Sure.
Do you think that, like you just said, like how they're not approved, and do you think that that has something to do with the popularity? Is that people are excited to be like in the know and doing something that is
Yeah,
either not
exactly.
accessible or like you have to kind of because
Yeah.
I feel like that's a little bit of it, and I also feel like the mode of administration is the injecting aspect too, is why people are so into it, is because it's like, oh, you're giving yourself a shot. Um, I don't know. I don't know if you think either of those are
Yeah, no,
irrelevant.
they're both important, and they're both crazy. The goal of like having this like exclusive access to this medicine nobody else knows about, it belies just rational thinking, because the average doctor and the average drug company and the FDA they're all incentivized to get out information about drugs, especially for drugs for mass market conditions. There's no secret under the sun for diseases like that. It's kind of like a pretty bizarre thing to want as well, especially as a healthy person. Like I said, if you have Duchenne muscular dystrophy and you heard about a drug that's approved in some other country and you think you want to try it, look, that makes sense. You're dying. You do anything to get a better quality of life. But for somebody who, I don't know, that they're just curious, like indulging that person's curiosity, and like bending over backwards to take resources from our medical system that could benefit people who are really sick, and then instead funnel it to people who are just a little too curious, and should just go back to doing what they were doing before instead of thinking about a drug that could make them stronger or skinnier or whatever when they're perfectly healthy. I think it's really like honestly selfish. There are people with Huntington's disease right now. Those resources are going to be used instead of developing a drug for Huntington's disease, where people who are dying could get better. We're thinking about having some healthy person get access to a drug they don't need. I mean, what a waste of time. Emily, you sound like you want to say something.
Sorry. Yeah, I think that something that's, I think that it's mainly like looks maxers. Like when you're talking about stuff like HCG and B, there's some peptides there, but I think it's mostly looks maxers who want to be like, people want to be more muscular, have more like, who think that this will give them more like facial features. A lot of it's also like people talk about this stuff on, I've seen it mostly on looks maxing forums, to be honest. People talking about peptides, so it's aimed towards like guys who want to become more attractive. But I think that the other side is like your post about retatrutide and like gray market GLP agonists. I think that's another major thing in like peptides. But I think about like with the psychology of it, a lot of it is people who know that they're already well enough who just want to become more attractive in some way. And I think like Isabel said about the idea of injecting something into yourself is very like, it's very techy to people. It's very like, I want to be my own doctor and I get to
I mean, it's kind of
administer this
insane,
myself. It's like,
it's really insane.
I mean,
like you're also like the regulations for impurities for injectable drugs are different from oral. That's one of the reasons peptides are seen as the backwater, is because they don't survive gastric first pass and first pass metabolism or the GI in general, the stomach. So like why peptides? Why not small molecules? Why not antibodies? Why not gene therapy? Why not? There's hundreds of other, or a dozen other molecular modalities, and peptides are kind of, like I said, one of the most undesirable ones for obvious reasons. So why are we getting excited about this old and shitty technology? And having to inject a drug is a liability, not an asset. And people can inject incorrectly. People can inject too deeply. People can inject in a sterile form, or a non-sterile way. There's a lot of reasons why people shouldn't be self-administering their own weird drugs. It just sort of goes without saying. It's kind of nuts. One person I talked to this morning said, in DMs, said, well, I've put a lot worse stuff in my body. And if that's our baseline, then, I suppose that's reasonable, but I think it's kind of that's not a great baseline to use.
I mean, oh, sorry, you can go, Emily.
Oh, sorry, no, you go.
I was just gonna say too, one of the things that I mean, because I'll say I've tried some peptides, and one of the things that I mean, there's like you have to be doing like math, and like you have to be looking up, how much of the bacteriostatic water to put in, and then depending on your body weight or the results or whatever it is, how much you're gonna be injecting. Like it's
What
not
a weird hobby.
it's not
Right?
like, yeah, it's not like you're just like, oh, this I put in this much, it's not like a very simple thing. And like, I just not to be like, because again, like I said, I'm one of the people who's tried it. So I'm not saying that like everybody that's trying and doing peptides is inherently like stupid. But it's not, if you're not doing it under like doctor supervision, it's not something that you have any information on in terms of like what your dosing should be. And then the other thing too is a lot of people are doing like the combination peptides, and they're doing multiple peptides at once. How are you even understanding what you're getting a result from and what's causing what? And then if you do have a bad result, you don't know what that's from either. The whole thing's kind of insane, but again, I'm participating in it, so I don't know what that says about me, but
Yeah, I think the BPC is like particularly insane because if you read the published literature on this so-called drug, there's nothing there, and that's the really amazing thing, is this one author who just published about his own drug over and over and over again, which is like the biggest red flag. I know a lot of people, including myself, who invented drugs and either never published about them or published once or twice and moved on to something else. It doesn't make a lot of sense this guy's been publishing about his drug for the last 20 years. And nobody, somehow it's become a sensation, but nobody in pharma has given a crap. In fact, a Polish group recently kind of published a pushback on BPC, and it was a very, gentle academic, kind of like repartee of BPC 157 and why it doesn't work or do anything. And it was skeptical of it partially for the same reason that almost every paper about it is written by the same dude who quote unquote invented it or isolated it from gastric juice. And there is not new peptides in gastric juice that we haven't, gone through already. I think that, those have been pretty well milked, and apparently the sequence is not really easily found as being actually existing. There's no molecule that it binds to. All drugs have to interact somewhere with the human body to produce an effect. So where is it binding? What is it? These are simple questions that you want answered before you try injecting yourself with a drug you don't know anything about. And then remember, the half-life is just minutes because it's not some protected, peptide. It's like every other peptide. It falls apart very quickly. There's no lipidation or other techniques you can use to extend half-life. It's just a naked peptide. So it'll be gone within seconds, maybe if you're lucky, a minute or two. What drug works after 1 or 2 minutes? Very, very few. You could if it's a hormone and it's binding to a hormone receptor, but in general, that would be extremely surprising. We probably would have found out what its binding target is. More likely, its binding target just doesn't exist. That's the simplest answer. So I think, and again, the fact this hasn't inspired any other scientists. Is it foolproof? Is that dispositive? No, but the obvious red flags are here. And think about how wonky or strange the disease targets are. It's sort of a good for what ails you, which is also kind of a silly idea. Very rarely in medicine do we have a thing that just helps everywhere. And this is a drug without a target. In fact, the one human trial that did take place showed that it did not work for that thing. So it's sort of a wonder drug that works for everything except the times it's being tested, it doesn't work. So it's kind of like, anecdotes are great, but whenever it slips into a pesky clinical trial, those anecdotal benefits disappear. And it's in these, disease states where you have a natural recovery, which makes diseases like depression very, very hard to treat, or to do clinical trials for, I should say, because you have a huge effect, but you have a huge recovery and placebo effect too. So in a lot of depression studies, everyone gets better. And sometimes you sit there and say, why don't I just give a placebo for depression? And the answer is, well, it's really more about when you're randomizing people to your trial. If they're in the throes of sickness and they may not enroll, if they're on the mend to recovery, they may enroll. And that sort of selection bias results in patients that are naturally recovering, they're getting out of their depression. That's pretty common. Depression is a phasic and cyclic disease, as are most pain. I've had this terrible back pain from being on a flight. My shoulder blade is, killing me. And, just about anything I take, quote unquote, today will make me feel like I'm better in a few days because of the nature of that kind of recovery. So, I have this natural recovery that's taking place because we don't, stay sick forever with most of these things. And that slowly we'll get that recovery. And if you just describe the temporal kind of like relationship to whatever you took before as, oh, that has to be what caused my recovery, it's a bit insane to sort of do that. So I don't know. I feel like sometimes people try too hard to be different, to be smart, to be whatever, to be independent and individualistic. And I find like they tend to cluster in communities like crypto and tech and things like that, where it's like, oh, no, I'm in the know. I know about the medicines that nobody knows about. I'm taking this stuff under the table. You don't know about this because you're not one of us. And that in-group signaling is, pretty funny and dangerous, to other people who are medical experts. I've never been tempted in my life, even though I love medicine. I love pharmaceuticals. I love studying them. I love reading about new drugs. I've never once in my life been tempted to take some random drug that I read about, order it online, and then inject it into myself. And I have illnesses. I have anxiety, for example. As I get older, I have other things going wrong with me. I've had asthma. I got my asthma treated by going to a doctor and realizing I was allergic to something, and getting rid of that allergen has improved my asthma dramatically. And like these basic, things that you can do are what medicine prescribes, and instead sort of like getting your information on Reddit and like through these alternative means, it makes you feel better about yourself, perhaps because you think that there's this route outside of the system that really smart or really rich people take. There isn't. And I think a lot of people do this. A lot of my investors, for example, take mini circle or other, kinds of like really exotic peptides. These are like the ones you can't even afford. They cost a fortune. And those types of things are to me, still placebos. And again, the stories are incredible and have won uncontrolled, dramatic improvements in muscle function or other things. But notice that they're never for an illness, which is what drugs are supposed to be for. And I think this is sort of this category error that there is some interest in, and there is a legitimate question about, which is, okay, I'm a medicine guy, I care about sick people. What do healthy people do? And part of me says, I don't even want to be in that conversation because medicine is for sick people. But I do understand that there are people that say, well, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe that I want to experiment with my body. I want to do other things that people haven't done yet. I want to see how fast I can run. I want to see how strong I can be. And I say, good luck to you, I suppose. I mean, if that's what you want, then who am I to stop you, right? I think that so long as you're informed and you understand it, I don't know that you should be stopped, but I think that, people who are trying to like create this false impression of efficacy, the guy I was debating, I think, did that when he said, oh, my father had this back pain and he took this peptide and he got better. That's dangerous. I think that's actually dangerous because as much as we want to believe, that there is a way we do these things where like you can take an anecdote and get it published. That's called a case report. You can take an anecdote and it can start a huge, groundswell of interest that creates a randomized controlled trial and actually gets you what you need, which is the card flipped over, as we sometimes say in biopharma investing, which is the truth. Did it work or did it not work? And I think the selection bias of, well, my uncle tried it and it worked. Well, how about every other uncle that you didn't hear about that tried it and didn't work? Did you do a tally of those? Did you try to normalize the data and put it all together? Of course not. And one positive placebo effect is 100,000 times louder than every quiet failure, and that may result in somebody sort of overestimating that they're being treated for something that may naturally just go away on its own. Pain tends to go away on its own. Again, the person's pain in this question was there for years, and then all of a sudden, went away as soon as the drug was given. But again, very suspicious, as in most cases in medicine, a one-time treatment that with a half-life that's just minutes does not lead to long-lasting benefits. I forgot my Claritin over the last few days. The Claritin molecule, which is normally creating a hydrogen bond network with the H2 receptor, the histamine 2 receptor, well, that hydrogen bond network that stops that receptor from working goes away because the drug disappears from my system. And guess what? I get my sniffles again, and my allergies are back. And you generally do need to take a drug repeatedly or often forever because of that just simple physiochemical reality that without changing the system will stay the way it is. Now, sometimes you do get this like knock the system back into its proper place with a steroid or with some other thing, but in very rarely does that happen in medicine. Almost always you have to keep that signal suppressed or you will get it back again. And there are exceptions to that, but why are we in this situation? We're dealing with like exception after exception after exception to the point where it's implausible that all these exceptions are satisfiable. So we have a peptide that has almost no half-life. Can that work? Yes. What are the a priori odds of it working? Like 0.1%. Okay, so we have a drug that's only been published by, okay, we have somebody who wants to interact. Let's hear from Melon. Melon, you said that my interlocutor was the only person stupider than me. I'd love
Okay,
I'd love
Martin.
to hear.
First off, sorry about that. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I want to keep it respectful. I want to keep it respectful.
No. Give me that same energy you had.
I was just shit posting.
No,
but
tell us
I
how
feel
smart
very
you are.
strongly about this topic, and I listen to
I
your
want to
debate
hear
with
about how
Max.
smart you are. Go ahead.
No. Hey, look. Let's not even get
you'll
into
be on display. Don't
who's
worry.
smart. I'm happy to be on display, and I really appreciate the opportunity. So, what I would just say is, I hear you from the farmer perspective. I believe in patents. I want to defend the great American pharmaceutical industry. I just think that when it comes to retatrutide, it's almost like emergency use authorization. If you look at the obesity crisis in
You got to be
America,
joking.
there's so many people with such severe obesity, they're unable to lose weight any other way. And you take Ozempic to what? Lose 10, 15 pounds. You take Mounjaro to maybe lose 20, 30 pounds. 20, 30 pounds. These are people at 400 pounds though, Martin. They need to lose 100 pounds.
There's actually a totally different drug for those guys. The people who have genetic obesity are in their own world, and they need the Rhythm drug. Rhythm has a drug for people like that are, in fact, it's a peptide, funny enough. But
a lot of them have insulin resistance, so it's a 2-for-1, right, with their diabetic optimization. And if you think about it, their A1C is too high to get surgery.
Retatrutide will be approved very soon. There's no rush to need retatrutide tomorrow. And in fact, most people with obesity aren't actually that much, more clinically predisposed to other diseases. These outcome studies that have been run for these diseases, they're not amazing. They don't reduce death. These are very modest outcome studies. This is not a miracle drug. It's a great drug, but it's not like GLPs are life-saving immediately. This isn't Keytruda. These drugs lose you weight. They, in many cases, being obese alone without concomitant hyperglycemia or hypertriglyceridemia or ApoC or things like that, it's actually not a risk factor for death. And the incessant desire to lose weight is mostly aesthetic, and there are many different ways to do it. You have bariatric surgery, you've got Ozempic,
but these people will not qualify for bariatric, right? Because their A1C is too high.
Listen, you can wait
12,
6 more.
Right?
You can wait 6 more months for retatrutide. It's not an emergency.
What if they have hypertriglyceridemia? There's a lot of these obese
people
with
lose 100
triglycerides
pounds
above
on
7,000.
Stop. You can lose 100 pounds in Mounjaro. If you're that overweight, you can get bariatric. It's not an emergency. Emergency is a kid dying of Duchenne muscular dystrophy or spinal muscular atrophy. That's an emergency. You're talking about fat people, really obese people. They're not in clinical emergency. They can wait 6 months. They can get on the retatrutide clinical trial. They can take a different GLP.
But they don't have regular fat. They have visceral fat and they have brown fat, the two most deadly and the hardest to lose.
What's wrong with Mounjaro?
Mounjaro is just not as effective, right? You're talking 20 to 40 pounds of weight loss, right? Versus Red is over 100.
I don't know that it's that different.
That delta is not true.
Yeah. So if you look at the Triumph 4 protocol and if you look at the phase 2 results, you're looking at about 78.4 pounds of weight loss on average with retatrutide, and you can confirm that there's no study from Mounjaro or Ozempic showing nearly that amount of weight loss.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you get more or less the same shit.
And again, I'm talking about the people who are 300 pounds plus. Those are the men in America that are on death row, essentially.
For people who are very, very, very obese, I would put them nowhere near the category you think they should be put in. But for the sake of this conversation, they are the DMD patient, perhaps, that should be looking out around the world for their DMD drug, and maybe they should be taking the risk of getting some emergency medicine to help themselves. The amount of people who are 300 pounds or more is less than 1% of people.
No. I think, Martin, I don't know where you live. Is it maybe California? I live in California, and I'm used to being around a lot of healthy people, or even New York City. But if you go to New Jersey, if you go to the southeastern seaboard, anywhere in the Northeast, really, you're gonna in the Midwest, you're gonna see. Texas, right? It's very common to be 300 pounds plus as a man, and then 250 pounds plus as a woman. And they have kids that are in the same boat. We're talking over 50% of the population is obese, right? You'd agree with that?
Okay, but they don't need retatrutide.
Not all of them. I agree.
Yeah, Mounjaro, you lose 20% of your weight with Mounjaro. That's
But okay, so
pretty
just on
good.
the patent side of it, right? Can I just address that one point? If you look at Ozempic, Ozempic was around for 2 decades before
By the way,
the patent was
2%,
started to be
US,
enforced.
2% of US adults, 1.5% are above 300 pounds.
Fair. So, but what do you think about the Ozempic patent discussion, right? Like that drug, that peptide was known about for 2 decades prior to the patent being enforced.
Well,
So
patents are always enforced. When you get a patent, it's enforced. When a generic company tries to make a generic, you
all I'm saying is no one
litigate.
cared about the gray market and the compound pharmacies making Ozempic until it
Oh,
became
you're
popular.
talking about you're not talking about patent litigation. You're talking about offshore illegal, sort of reimportation, things like that.
It's been around for 2 decades, right? And it was just it's only became a bad thing, right, when it was popular. That's what happened, right? If you look at the Ozempic timeline, it's the opposite of Retta. Retta was just developed a couple years ago, and now it's been enforced, basically since then, even more so
Well, we have
recently.
a lot
But
of rules in the United States. You cannot traffic medicine in the United States of America without a license. And I think that's a good thing. So
I'm all for law and order. I'm all for law and order, right? But again, the drug won't be available legally for probably 2 years minimum, right? 2028 is
the
the
one
best
and a
case
half
scenario.
percent of Americans that are 300 pounds or more will just have to suffer with Mounjaro.
I hear you. Even with Manjaro, that is quite expensive for a lot of Americans.
Okay, they can wait till it goes generic.
Oh, but I mean, in America, that won't be generic until 2040.
Okay.
I mean, do you have anyone who's overweight in your family?
Even if
If
I
you had more
did, what I would
proximity to
say is
these
that
severely morbidly obese people,
what I
you
would say
might
is
feel more sympathy.
what I would say. I have a lot of sympathy as somebody who's dedicated his life to medicine. I think that if you are asking for ways to make medicine easier to access, that's up to Eli Lilly. It's not up to you and me making stuff in our bathtub.
Do you have the same view on the other peptides that aren't being created by Eli Lilly? What about like pinalin,
Like what?
pinalin?
I don't know what that is.
It's a research peptide. It's been around for a little bit. No one's trying to enforce that patent. No one really knows about it. But Andrew Huberman, for example, is taking it, and it gives great energy, great sleep, a few other benefits that have been reported. There are studies out on it, at least animal studies. I don't think there's any push
Nobody
for
can.
human
No.
studies. But again, no one cares about this peptide because it's not popular yet. And what I'm trying to say is, if you look at the Ozempic history, it's all about, is there a commercial incentive to protect this patent? If so, then yes, Chinese peptides are bad. If not, then Chinese peptides can flourish, right? That's the mentality,
I
that
don't.
duality, I think, is the problem.
Maybe that's your perspective. My perspective is that unless you have complied with U.S. Title, believe it or not, even though I've been to jail, I do try to follow the rules. U.S. Title
I
21.
respect that. I think your jail experience has been awesome, and I love hearing
Thank
you
you.
talk about it. So
U.S. Section 21, 505 prohibits the trafficking of interstate commerce of medicines that's not FDA approved. So any Chinese peptide falls under that, right? Any drug whatsoever that hasn't proven efficacy and safety cannot be sold or advertised as having a medical benefit. And this idea that, again, everyone wants to play Dr. House and pretend that they're doctors all of a sudden, or pharmaceutical executives, that that there seems to be like this mental hangup of like, oh, I'm smart enough to do that. I read the Reddit thing. I don't need a
well,
doctor. I can inject myself. And
look at the opposite, though, right? The trust your doctor mentality has led to us being the most unhealthy country ever
I
in our
disagree.
history and in the world.
I think we're the healthiest country in the world. I think all the statistics are bunk. I think that everyone is jealous of the amazing American drug industry. For example, we cured cystic fibrosis, the largest genetic killer disease, and we made huge strides towards the third one, which is SMA. We're trying to make strides for Huntington's disease. These are real illnesses.
If you
Wanting
hop on a
quote
flight to
unquote.
Philadelphia, if you hop on a flight to
Andrew, hold on.
Alabama,
Let me
if you
finish my
hop on a
thought.
flight
I
to
just want to finish my
Tennessee,
thought.
sorry, go ahead, yeah, go ahead.
Andrew Huberman saying some random chemical gives him great energy. That's not medicine. Medicine is saving the lives of. I had a friend die of cystic fibrosis. It inspired me to do pharma. That's real medicine. Cystic fibrosis is no longer a killer. That's an incredible story that made Vertex a
I
ton of
think that's
money.
medicine 2.0, right? And I think the whole idea behind medicine 3.0 is rather than just treating chronic illness, right, with the acute therapies, why don't we treat real lifestyle conditions that are actually affecting day-to-day lives of Americans, right? That's actually deteriorating our lifestyle. It's
We
not just about, are you dying of X, Y, or Z
those poor
today
dying, those
versus
dying
having a
people, those
horrible
pesky
life
dying
for the
people
next
getting
30
in
to
our
40
way
years.
of our looks maxing. We need to looks
No,
max.
it's a
Forget the
quality
kid
of
with
life thing, right?
Huntington's disease or the kid with muscular dystrophy. Let's put our resources into the looks maxing. I think that's terrible.
I agree that we should not be promoting Retta for basically skinny people who want to be skinnier. Like that, I agree with. I'm talking women above 250 pounds, men above 300 pounds. Can we give a carve out to them?
Yeah, we have one. I mean, Lilly has a way to get compassionate use. The FDA and others, bodies that powers that be don't think it's a good idea. Obesity is not exactly a life-threatening condition. It's if it were, compassionate use could be granted, and many diseases have drugs that are not approved, but you have patients on compassionate use. Could Lilly create like a extremely morbid obesity carve out for very, very obese people who are seen to be at, imminent clinical risk? I don't think a GLP would save them anyway if you're at imminent clinical risk, because obesity in and of itself it's a long disease process, right? I mean, you can look at Dave Blunt's, the famous singer or rapper, you can be 400 pounds and live for a long time. You don't necessarily
And
die.
they're going to be the poster child for Retta in a few years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're the poster cells for Mounjaro and Ozempic, right?
Yep.
They currently are. And there is, there is a upper limit to how much weight you can lose.
Well,
And
that's but on the
Well,
current ones,
so
right?
is Serena Williams, right? So is Serena Williams. I mean, you're talking about obesity, but how about people who just want to lose some weight? Is that not a valid
Serena is a
marker?
great example of someone
yeah,
who
Ozempic
was
is
not significantly overweight, right? She just needed to lose maybe
great.
30 pounds. But
You
I'm
have,
talking about the
if
people who
you,
need to lose 100 plus.
yeah, if you want to lose weight and you can find a doctor who thinks Ozempic is right for you, you can get a prescription. And pretty soon these drugs will be very cheap, whether they're generic or.
Do you think people will be taking Reddit as so many people are today, just to lose some weight, not because they're like clinically obese?
Yeah, of course. And HGH is used sometimes for the same thing. Doctors obviously are hesitant.
But HGH and Retta is like the risk profile is pretty wide, don't you think?
Well, it's not FDA approved yet. It has a dramatic weight loss, but it comes with 3 mechanisms of action, which add safety risk, by the way. And most people don't need to lose 24% of their body weight. Ozempic, which has 1 mechanism, or Mounjaro, which has 2, are both, for most doctors, I think would start without a pharmacological intervention, would start with diet and exercise, and then move on to potentially a pharmaceutical intervention, which is not like some trivial thing. We're talking about, putting a foreign substance into your body. And if you're going to do it, at least do it with FDA regulated sort of, supply. And
Well,
supply.
I agree. I
That's
mean,
what one of
say
the
the
was
Reddit pen comes out, it's still going to cost a few $1,000s. Are you saying the gray market's just? I mean, yeah,
You can get a lifetime
you
supply
can.
of Retta on the gray market for less than
It's
$500.
Eli Lilly's
Yeah,
product.
oh my
It's not
god.
your product. It's not some.
There's like adulterants in there. Be very careful where you're getting this
That's
Yeah,
not
stuff.
true. You can get a
it's
COA of
also
99.9% purity plus.
that's
So
nonsense.
you just need
By the
to,
way, that's
you know,
nonsense. There's no COA with 99. That's total bullshit.
if
These
you go to
aren't labs.
FINRIC, we've got publicly available data on this.
It's all fake, dude. Like, I think
But
that
these labs are the same ones making it for the pharmaceutical companies,
no, they're
right?
not.
Yeah, but like, can you you're getting them in the gray market? Like, you cannot sue them. Like,
Let me just mute everyone real quick. So there's so much to address here, but I'll just start with the price stuff because this is certainly something I'm known for. This drug is the creation of Eli Lilly, not you, not some Chinese company, and nobody else. It is their job to sell this drug. It is their right to sell this drug. Nowhere on planet Earth, if somebody is selling this drug, can they claim that it's theirs. And anywhere on planet Earth that they're doing this, it's my opinion that Eli Lilly should be able to shut them down. And you would say the same exact thing for your intellectual property. And that's because it costs hundreds of millions of dollars, in this case maybe even $1 billion, to make this intellectual property, and to have somebody just simply run off with it because they can, because they're in some country where they think they can't get stopped, it's really a shame. And our country is better off making sure that that supply doesn't come to America, because every ounce of Eli Lilly's drug is vetted by the FDA. And it's vetted by not just like a flimsy COA of a quote-unquote HPLC of a quote-unquote 99.9% purity. It takes a lot to do peptide by amino acid description of a drug. That is a really
I
expensive.
I completely agree and respect
Yeah,
that.
don't interrupt me though.
I'm sorry about that.
It's okay. Just don't.
But like
Just don't do it again. It's really difficult to determine. So I guess I'll move on from the IP and pricing thing. But to the second point on C of A's and stuff like that, you have entire departments of drug companies that deal with this stuff. Stability, purity, mass, like HPLC, MS, coupled to do amino acid, sequence identity, and then also the lipidation of these drugs. Like, I don't believe that these facilities are capable. And second, they're not vetted facilities, right? The FDA is supposed to inspect these things, and they're not inspected. And so sterility is almost never a guarantee. And why should people just try to do this on their own? It's crazy. Just get the prescription. If you're really sick, you can get the prescription. If the drug is unaffordable to you, again, Eli Lilly has ways of making that more affordable, and sooner or later they will be very cheap and generic. But I think this whole do-it-yourself medicine, what is really the strong incentive to do this? Is it truly health, or is it wanting to feel like you're in charge of something and doing something cool and unique?
All fair points, Martin, I agree with a lot of them. I would just say the do-it-yourself approach that you're seeing on the internet and Reddit, as you mentioned, right? That's being born out of the fact that doctors today are not doing enough. Because if you look at Americans today, over 50% of them are obese. A lot of those people are morbidly obese, especially in specific states that tend to be poor, tend to be uneducated. You recommend, focus on diet and exercise first to lose weight, but that's clearly not working today, right? Those tools are available today. You can eat healthy and exercise today. It's not working. These patients need a much more serious intervention, and doctors
Only
aren't able to
nine.
prescribe that today, right?
Only 9% of Americans are severely obese. Only 1% or so are 300 pounds or more. There are a number of interventions for them. Retatrutide is not the only one. Retatrutide is a
It's just the best one we know today.
Well, it doesn't matter, because retatrutide is a small improvement over Mounjaro. Mounjaro is really effective, and bariatric surgery is really effective. Behavior modification can be effective. There's a drug from Rhythm for people with POMC and other genetic mutations that result in some of those really wild 400 or 500 pound people. So and again, retatrutide will be here in a matter of months, as will the Amgen drug, as will these other drugs. This isn't about access. This is about something else, and I can't put my finger on it. But to me, the word cool actually comes up. The word neat, the word
Martin,
I'm doing something cool. I read about this on Reddit, and I'm getting it from some secret Chinese site, and I'm mixing it up, and I'm putting it in my thigh and injecting myself, which is nuts. But that, to me, that mystique is what's happening. It is not about I'm 300 pounds. Nobody here is 300 pounds and needs this drug. Of course there are people who are really overweight and need intervention, but those people have choices. This craze, this trend is way more than just that. BPC, taking different modafinil type drugs when you're perfectly fine. This is about enhancement, right? This is about trying to be the superhuman, like you said, medicine 3.0, right?
Right. And we can all agree that the influencers peddling peptides, that's total bullshit. Like clavicular type community, like them taking peptides purely for looks maxing, that's bullshit. No one wants to defend that. But
now again, I mean, look, I'm not
I do. That's what my hand's raised for.
Well, that's the thing, right? Should people be stopped from doing something like that? I don't necessarily think so. I think when I think of medicine, what gives me the warm and fuzzies is companies like the companies I've ran and the companies I've invested in over the years who are trying to make drugs for really sick people. If there's another part of medicine, like cosmeceuticals and healthy people medicine, which to me is an oxymoron, and those people want to experiment with themselves, which, if you're blessed enough to be healthy I have 3 boys who have pecan. I'm the only person who's ever made a therapeutic for pecan. It did not work. At least V1 of it did not work in phase 3 trials. I did not put it into phase 3 trials. My company, against my advisement, did so. But pecan is a horrible neurological disease where you can't move, can't speak, and you eventually atrophy and die. I have 3 brothers with this terrible illness. I just had my baby boy who's vibrant and healthy. Health is a beautiful thing not to be abused. And if you want to take those risks, you want to go crazy, you want to do body modifications that I wouldn't do. I'm sure you've seen people who want to be like a lizard or do really wacky things. That's going to happen more and more. I told a friend of mine that if he wanted to be a fighter, that he should take a sclerostin antibody. Not a peptide, by the way, but I'm sure somebody would mislabel it. Sclerostin is, when you block sclerostin, you get these immensely dense bones. In fact, they're so dense that you can't even swim. You can't stay afloat with them. So this was discovered through a normal genetic mutation that happened in a tribe. And they found members of the tribe could actually jump off a building and not suffer injuries. Their bones were so dense that they were basically unstoppable. And I told my friend about it. He immediately said, "How do I get this drug?" And I said, "Well, you can find a guy in the US who will prescribe it. It's very expensive. Or you can go find somebody to make you a good enough version of it. And this is a body modification." There's also a tribe of Pakistanis who do not feel pain. They have a so-called channelopathy of the sodium receptor and NaV 1.7, I believe. And if you block NaV 1.7, you don't feel pain. And these are people, they could put a sword through their leg and not feel it. Of course, they still have a problem doing that. It's not smart to do that. But these people, let me just finish the story. You can potentially make a NaV 1.7 inhibitor. In fact, Vertex tried. Nobody's made a really effective one yet. But think about these superpowers. You could have indestructible bones, sounds cool. Never feel pain, sounds great. Who likes pain? And a plethora of other things that I can think of that would naturally enhance you and make you this superhuman. Is it a good idea? Should you do it? Is the risk worth the reward? I actually don't care. That's not, I have my opinion. I don't think you should. It's not a great risk reward. But if you want to try shit, who am I to stop you? I just think that if you advertise it and tell other people to do it, and those kinds of things start to run across very well-meaning regulation that, for example, people always ask me about nootropics. And I always say there's really no such thing. And I point to a study where chess players took either Concerta, modafinil, or caffeine. And none of them scored any better than placebo in their chess games, which is, chess is a sort of intellectual exercise. And again, I think after 25 years in pharma, a lot of people are underestimating the placebo effect. It is very powerful. It is very hard to do a trial that works really well and shows your drug works. And nicotine is something that somebody mentioned to me today, or somebody mentioned online today, that nicotine creates intellectual enhancement, where it absolutely does not. But it's something that many people swear by, and they have their little kind of ideas that this is good for me and it works for me, and I'm going to try it. And again, nobody should be punished for that. Your curiosity about your own body is natural, but I think going to the extent of ordering drugs from China and then shooting them up is a little bit it's a step too far for me.
It's risky for the average person. I agree.
Yeah.
And if I could just say one last thing, and then I'll shut up and pass it off to Dempsey. I know you've had your hand raised. I just want to ask you one more question, Martin, just on this patent enforcement. Do you feel though that this is purely because this patent was developed by a U.S. pharmaceutical company? I mean, let's imagine Retta was actually owned and patented by a Chinese, pharmaceutical company, and let's say they wanted to sell it to the U.S. at a 100x markup, just like we're selling them GPUs. Would you really feel the same way, right? Or is it when it's fine, right? I'm patriotic too, but at the end of the day, the other problem is that, right, when you look at the non-patented alternatives to Retta, there's basically nothing. You have experimental compounds like Na931, but that is patented, right, by Biomed. You've got CagriSema, which is patented by Novo Nordisk. You've got VK2735, patented by Viking. You've got Servodutide. That's I think actually a German company, or a New Zealand pharmaceutical company that's got the patent on that. So really, like you're basically saying that we have to wait until like 2050, 2060 to get the patent-free drug. Otherwise, now we just need to suffer and wait.
It's their product, of course. They're allowed to make it. I mean, it's the pharma industry. I mean, would it make sense if I could sell Kanye West's music? I mean, it'd be a terrible thing. If I could just take somebody else's product that they worked hard for, let's say a Jeep hardware patent on some circuitry, and say, "Oh, nice patent. Thank you for giving me the instruction manual on how to make this." And you can't sue me because I'm in a place you can't find me. And by the time you find me, I'll set up shop somewhere else. This is like just a flagrant. As the world becomes more modernized, intellectual property becomes more important, and the hard work of a circuit designer at Broadcom, yeah, Broadcom's a $1 trillion company. Yeah, they're not going to miss a couple million here and there. But if you want people to work on the next retatrutide, you have to respect the current retatrutide. Otherwise, the next retatrutide won't come around. Lilly won't make it because, there are people stealing it. And I think condoning the piracy of it, now piracy for a teenager who wants to read a book on hardware and he's poor and he can't afford the textbook, look, I look the other way. But, for people that can afford...
They killed the JSTOR guy, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, I get it, but I think that...
And all the AI models, right? They're all stolen on... They're all trained on stolen
many
data.
of those companies may have to pay their price. And a lot of them have now, sought licenses for the data. And those, as you know, and this is something my girl who's in the audience, that's sort of her job, but those more and more those companies have had to purchase data, license data, and increasingly companies that have that data are seen as more and more valuable because they have data that the LLM companies want. And they're also now starting to think about making sure that the provenance of that data isn't just left around online. It isn't just, kind of out there to be downloaded. And, I don't know what will happen with the Anthropic litigation, but I think a reasonable settlement will occur and that the intellectual property will be somewhat respected. But at the same time, we still don't even know, in the world of AI, we don't know what that means. Is AI learning something? Is that the same as piracy? But you can clearly say here that making a molecule that, like, as you said just a minute ago, somebody else just invented this. They just poured the hundreds of millions, and it's already out there in China, available for you to sneakily re-import.
And partly that's because the nature of peptides, right? They're very easy to sequence, right? As soon as you know the amino acid sequence, you can make the peptide.
Yes and no, right? Because you also have to lipidate these things. Otherwise, without the linker and the lipid, they'll quickly get attacked by enzymes and be gone in a few minutes. So I think about a bunch of that retatrutide is actually just semaglutide.
Well, Martin, what do you think about the Indian legislature not legislature, but I guess IP policy? You can get GLP-1s from drug manufacturers for $15 a month or something like that. That's become super cheap. Do you think that is IP value destruction also? That's
Yeah,
what
absolutely. And India notoriously is uninterested in IP for obvious reasons. And
don't you think that's enabling health
before I
access
can
to
even
these
finish, you have a
obese
whole bunch
people?
No, India tends to avoid intellectual property just because they like to make generics. They're very good at it. But when Indian pharma evolves into eventually making branded drugs, and they slowly have started to do that, they too will feel this, urge to protect their discoveries. And, I think that's, it's sort of like pollution for China and India. They're sort of like the biggest polluters in the world right now for industrial purposes. And they want an exemption because they're just getting through their industrialized period, while US and Europe has dropped emissions dramatically. India is just in a place where respecting IP is not high on the agenda, but in 50 years, when the Indian pharma companies are just as smart and just as capable and just as, making just as good drugs as the US, then in terms of innovative drugs, they'll cry for IP too.
Well, we have a lot of fat people. We've got obesity is quite a crisis. So it's like, yeah, we want to respect IP. There's a reason. I guess we didn't put it down to $15 immediately. It was done after a few years.
Yeah.
But But
Still
what
stealing.
about the health? Like, I mean, I'm thinking about the amount of people that this will help. I would love to think about
Well, maybe
protecting
government,
Eli's IP, but
maybe government should get into it, doing that if they want to help their people instead of stealing an American company's stuff. And Novo is, a Danish company, so it's
well, we
not really
licensed it, but whatever.
it's not a nationalistic thing. But like, if a country deems a drug so important that it has to steal it, maybe a country should get into the drug business.
It's would you say publicly traded companies manufacturing this drug in India that's stealing the drug?
Yeah, if you don't have a license,
You think they don't have licenses
if
to
you
do
don't
it?
have a license to the patent, which they don't.
Dr. Reddy's is manufacturing it. They very much likely have a license.
No, they don't have a
Right.
license. They just have deemed the patent of Lilly and Novo as unenforceable or expired.
Oh,
Now,
right. Yes.
semaglutide has, in many countries, expired already, but to look at somebody's
What do you
patent,
think the reasoning on that might be?
well, if you want, you can say that a patent is unenforceable or obvious. You might say, well, any GLP substitutions to the core GLP amino acid sequence, I can change one amino acid. Guess what? It's still a GLP. So
Yeah.
if I change one amino acid, is that an invention? In America, we say yes. Almost everything is an invention over here. But in India, they could just simply say, the Indian Patent Office can say, no, we reject that patent. That's not a real patent.
Mhm.
And there's also statutory exclusivity in the US where any new drug gets 5 years, no matter what. Whereas I'm not sure the same applies necessarily in India. So I think that every country is different, but the easiest way to get on everyone's bad list is, quickly saying, oh, I'm trying to, disrespect IP. Because when it's your turn to get IP respected, you're not going to like the reaction people have. And then also you can get, embargoed and other things like that. There's plenty of warfare you could do economically that if you're not going to respect our IP for our pharmaceutical companies, well, we might not trade with you on this, or we might impose tariffs on that. And that kind of thing just goes back and forth in a nasty way. Parmita?
Hey, yeah. So first of all, I generally agree with a lot of stuff that you're saying. But I just wanted to point out, someone was saying that, it's so incredibly important for people above, 300 pounds to lose weight faster. I don't know why it is assumed, like I see this everywhere. People assume that the rate of weight loss is like a good indicator for effectiveness, and that, like, as you said, like there's a certain amount of weight you want to lose. Um i i i just like don't like I looked into it further. I don't see that many cases where there's this kind of urgency. The most I've seen is like obstructive sleep apnea, causing them to need like some more assistance. But outside of that, it seems like Manjaro like is the preferred drug of choice because of the fact that a patient is like that obese. They obviously want to try a drug that they have more data for. And so that's like one thing that, like, I really think is so important. The other thing I wanted to mention is, I guess, like, someone was talking about Andrew Huberman and using these peptides that have not been approved. A lot of these peptides are working on cell cycles. They're working on, like, they cause, like, even in our lab, like we see that they would cause like a massive increase in cell proliferation and so on and so forth. And many of these are through passive diffusion getting into the brain. So like that, there's a whole a side concern about cancer. Obviously, a lot of the cell cycle related biology is like something that can help. It can cause so-called rejuvenation. It can also cause there to be a massive increase in maybe how fast the cancer is spreading and so on and so forth. And then the last thing I wanted to say is that everyone's talking about peptides kind of like these are these research chemicals, and we didn't used to have research chemicals before this, or we haven't had peptides for a long time. It kind of seems like the thing that scares me the most about this is that it seems like there's a lot of, first of all, like the gray market, is basically intervening with people's sort of choices here. I don't even feel completely comfortable with the idea that we're letting people just inject peptides that could potentially cause cancer even into themselves. It's like extremely dangerous, and I feel like this whole sort of
To
peer
each
pressure
their
that,
own, permanent, and devil take the hindmost.
oh god,
Yeah.
I mean, like, I don't know, like it just scares the
I
crap out of
agree.
me.
I mean, how much should the government step in and stop every idiot from doing every dumb thing? That's the whole point of libertarianism versus a police state. And, somewhere in the middle is probably the answer. But if somebody wants to do something bad enough and they really are interested in taking this, drug that has uncertain benefits but has very certain risks, it's a bad risk reward. But somebody wants to do it, they're going to do it. And, we shouldn't necessarily nanny them to death. But I agree with you. It's odd, this desire for our generally healthy person to want to stab themselves. Most people hate injections. Most people don't want to learn how to do them. Most people don't want to, fill a syringe. I mean, this is not, trivial stuff. And doing it for an uncertain, again, if you're dying of muscular dystrophy, absolutely roll the dice. But, if you're healthy and you want to look smacks, again, that's on you. If you want to do that, there are many class action lawsuits of pharma companies where pharma companies have had to pay even though the drug didn't provably cause any harm. So, people will tend to blame the temporal association, that exact, time they took something, then they got sick, is the same times that there are people who take things and they got better. And that's their proof that the thing that they just did is causal to the evidence they've just seen. And they'll do that for good things and bad things. And they tend to do that for bad things when there's a company that they can sue. When it's over the, across the ocean peptide manufacturer without an address, that tends to be something where they say, well, this peptide caused my cancer, but what am I going to do about it? Whereas it's a lot easier to sue, the drug companies. I want to see what 5 Seconds or Jeff Vincent, who sounds like Jeff is a drug guy. So,
yeah, that's
go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Also, have been synthesizing peptides through FMOC and TBOC chemistry, solid phase synthesis, as you alluded to earlier, for the past 20 years. I'm very familiar with all of this, including what you said, Martin, which is true, that there is no such thing in peptide synthesis as 99% pure, even at pharma scale. At pharma scale, when we ship peptides all the time for any types of trials, I mean, the best, if we push twice through HPLC, is we're going to say 98, 98.5. And agree with you on the majority of what you said, for sure. I certainly, as long as, I think the biggest problem in the Western world is the low income and poor eating habits and inability. I mean, so one thing I would push back on is that diet and exercise is something that's just a failed. I mean, everybody knows it.
Yeah. Well, it is where doctors want to start, because as a doctor, your job is to do no harm, and you see if that works, and a little education on the patient and a little diet and exercise. I mean, think about it. If the patient literally is never exercising, I'm looking at myself in the mirror here. There's a lot of benefits to exercise, and starting to incorporate a daily walk or a daily run can be very helpful for multiple reasons, and may also cause some weight loss. And then
I think there's no question it's the answer. But these GLPs also drive. They help drive vitamin C, increased vitamin C levels in the cells, and I think. I don't know how they're getting them. I'm not that involved in this whole peptide thing as far as the people taking them gray market. We're developing something completely different, which I really want to send you a DM about.
Yeah.
But certainly I think everyone should have access to at least something like that, because I think type 2 diabetes is by far the biggest problem we're going to experience
One
globally.
really neat thing is you're going to get the non-peptidomimetic GLPs, right? So Lilly has orgo. Oh, I can never say this one. Orgoflipron or something like this, or Foraglipron or something like that.
The small molecule?
It's a small molecule, non-peptidomimetic. Pfizer failed a bunch of these, but it's coming back as well. Roche has one as well. So we will be GLP pills, true non-peptides, very soon. And those will go generic and they'll be around for 10 cents. So around 2040 or 2050 or something like that, the whole world will have access to cheap weight loss drugs, which is good. But again, I'm as much as I agree with you that diet and exercise are famously shitty, I also think that, and this is hard for me to say as a drug guy, but I really do believe it, we should not rush to the medicine cabinet every single time something's wrong, right? I mean, I wanted to do, again, stupid anecdote, but I had some terrible asthma. I was taking 2 or 3 different asthma drugs, and I finally went to an allergist, and the allergist said, you're allergic to dust mites. We changed the pillows in our house, and I'm fine now, and I don't need to take all these stupid medicines. And again, I'm very comfortable taking medicines, but I was going to go on an antibody, a 5-LO inhibitor. There's only one of those, the leukotriene synthesis inhibitor, montelukast, Claritin, and 2 different inhalers. All that stuff was unnecessary because I was too lazy to just get this stupid allergy test and so quick to rush for the medicine cabinet. And the same thing applies in a lot of overweight and obesity, where it's like, well, actually, instead of reaching for the GLP, I should probably do some exercise. Instead of reaching for the GLP, I should think about not eating pizza every day. Those are the types of things that, doctors are supposed to have that conversation. And then only after having tried those things and having that honest conversation with the patient, did you stop the McDonald's? Did you stop the soda? Then you can say, okay, we've tried everything we can try, let's do the GLPs. But a good quarter to a half of patients will actually change their lifestyle. And I think the people who are really resistant to changing that, sometimes those are patients that need some psychiatric or psychological counseling. Lord knows that depression tends to cause this inertia or lack of volition for patients to get up and go do the exercise. That's sort of a sign of depression, I think. And then finally, of people that are resistant to all of those things, and yes, they should be started maybe on a low dose of semaglutide. Start with one mechanism of action. There's no need to introduce 3 at once with retatrutide, right? Like you have 3 different physiological, you have a thing about GPCRs there, and you talked about blocking synthesis. This is all high science stuff. Making peptides is hard. You have to block off a bunch of peptides that you can ligate to, and you then have an area that you can grow the peptide at. And adding lipidation or adding these fatty acids is something that has extended the half-life of these patents immensely. And that's also something that I'm worried that these Chinese labs won't get right. It's not trivial. And then talking about HPLC, if this were the right venue, I'd love for you to explain to people what that is and what does it tell you, and most importantly, what does it not tell you? Because seeing a 99% HPLC may not, be the interpretation that, that the layperson thinks it's interpreting. Not all of these tests tell you everything you need to know. You can step on a scale and it could be 99% correct in one dimension, but totally incorrect in another dimension. And the test is not that easy to calibrate. And there's often a battery of tests that you do to really determine the identity. And that extra fatty acid adds a ton of molecular weight to this thing and a ton of polarity.
That's exactly right. And that's I think that's what you were getting at earlier when you were saying, a lot of these peptides are simply, as you say, unblocked. They're not acetylated or they're not esterified on either end. So they're very easily attacked. All the enzymes in our plasma are designed to look for the left side or the right side, the N terminus on the left or the right side, the C terminus, and then begin breaking it down immediately. So typically, as Martin just discussed, we on the C terminus on the right side, we'll add like palmitic acid or different that's a 16 carbon or different fatty acids, and so that dramatically increases the weight of each molecule. You take the peptide and stick a heavy fatty acid on it. but it does make it far more polar and give it a chance to actually get inside the cell. When
Far less polar. We both went backwards on that, right?
Uh-huh. And something that has bothered me specifically is things like this talk of and again, I don't want to talk too much out of school because I'm not that well read, but about this Dr. Kavinsky out of Russia. But I have looked into what he claims. There's this peptide epithylamine. He claims it's a very short, small amino acid. I think 4-mer, and uh, he claims it binds to the major groove of the DNA, the 1.9 angstrom, the wide groove in the DNA. And I'm thinking to myself, how do you take
No
an
way.
unblocked, how do you take an unblocked peptide where it's not even if it was acetylated or esterified or both, or even with the fatty acid, how do you get enough of that intracellular then into the nucleus?
Yeah, impossible.
And yeah, and then it's going to bind onto the major groove of the DNA. I mean, it's
To
a
do
great,
what, right? I
neat
mean, that
story.
sounds deadly to
Well,
me.
to induce telomerase, but that's
Yeah,
what he says.
total
But
nonsense. Anytime somebody
it's
mentions
bizarre.
telomerase, I roll my eyes. I mean, it's
Yeah,
a former, especially a 4 amino acid peptide is pretty small. Although I've seen folks, real people publish on single amino acids,
that's
sometimes
correct.
having
Sure.
certain physiological reactions, especially in certain diseases, some especially rare diseases. So you never say never in medicine, but extraordinary claims also require extraordinary evidence, which is what bothers me about BPC. All this talk about GLPs. All right, look, GLPs work. Can the Chinese guys make them? Of course they can. Should you be taking them? Probably not. But do they work? And is it real? Look, I mean, 95% of the time you're probably going to be fine. But if millions of people do that, the 5% are still, probably making a questionable choice. But let's go over to BPC 157. There's one guy, and he's Croatian, so I have kinsmanship here, and no particular reason to attack him. In fact, I'd normally defend a countryman, but this guy has published about his invention for 30 years. He's the only person who publishes about it. I've never seen that in medicine. Most prolific drug discoverers, you put your thing out in JMedChem or something like that. Our company had a great first of its kind DHFR inhibitor. We published it in JMedChem, really proud of it. We didn't keep publishing about it every year for no reason. You put your work out there, you let it sit. People want to read it and react to it, great. If they don't, they don't. That's typically what happens. Nobody cares. And that's it. And you've contributed one brick in the wall of medicine, and that's fantastic. But to publish this thing over and over and over and over again, it's something that to anybody skilled in medicine, we know that increases the amount of BS. That doesn't, inventors and authors who do that, if anything, it feels like a charlatan doing it because it's like, well, why? You have created the thing. Why do you have to prove that it works so bad in animal studies and in preclinical studies? Shouldn't some doctor at this point take it upon himself, or some company, and go do the human clinical trials? And this continuous publication is like, well, what are you trying to prove? If nobody's done that in 30 years, when are they going to start doing it? This person's so convinced they have a wonder drug, but can't convince anybody who has the means to test it. But somehow millions of people have been sort of lied to or faked or confused into taking this. And to me, it's a product like any other product. Somebody might want to sell, drop shipping or stuff on Etsy or whatever. This is just a product somebody can promote. It can't hurt you. It's probably mostly saline at the end of the day, and you've tricked a bunch of people who are sad and sick and need help, who maybe are at their last straws with medicine, and for $20, BPC 157 might do the trick for them. And to me, that's manipulative. It's extremely unethical, to play on somebody's need for therapy. I know, again, tons of rare disease patients. One of my good friends has osteogenesis imperfecta, terrible brittle bone disease with no treatment. And we've always thought about what can we do for this guy, and how cruel would it be to say, oh, you know what, you can just take BPC 157, it might work for you for $20, because you can get it from some weird peptide site. And to me, this is why we have the FDA. It's to sort of settle and lay down the law for physicians as to what they can prescribe and what they can't, because the temptation from unscrupulous folks, and some of you may be saying that I have the gall to say this, but this is way too unscrupulous even for me to try to make a fake medicine, pretend that it has all these effects, sell it to people who need it. Some people are curious and they just want to mess around, but some people are probably actually sick and really need something. And this is just this, to me, terrible way to besmirch medicine, which obviously pharmaceuticals have a bad rap in general. I contributed to that, unfortunately, but it wasn't my intent. And I really do want to show people the great things that pharmaceuticals can do, and GLPs are part of that. But stuff like BPC, is anybody in the room interested in BPC or advocates for it? And I want to give 5 seconds his say, and then I'll get you done as well, Dempsey.
Yeah, so specifically just on the note of BPC, there was 2 Taiwanese studies in 2014 and 2017.
I saw them.
Yeah, they didn't declare efficacy, but they did declare method of action. So that's the one part that I wanted to, you touched on.
They didn't say for sure that it has a mechanism of binding a certain receptor, right? They kind of have this vague angiogenesis or something like that, right?
The argument was basically that that it was a local genetic activator, essentially, that it basically upregulated synthesis of like RNA or whatever in where it was located, and that's why the half-life had longer. The super ultra short half-life had an extended effect.
Right. That does not sound great for what it's worth. That sounds a little oncogenic and also very non-specific. Typically, what you want is a crystal structure, right? Here is where the drug attaches to the other thing. This very non-specific, hand-wavy kind of well, it does this. Now, again, in medicine, you have situations like that where you don't know the mechanism. Thalidomide, very famously, didn't have a mechanism of action for its first 50, 60 years. But I think whenever you start stacking exceptions and saying, well, that's not true, a one-legged man once did run a marathon, it's just sort of and then you add, well, it's also true that a guy who was blindfolded once ran a marathon. And it's also true that a guy who was 96 once ran a marathon. And then you say, well, that means that a 96-year-old blind one-legged man can also run a marathon. This is very much not the right way to look at it. And I think that folks try that regardless. And, BPC is a good example of that. You have a 1-minute half-life, no known mechanism, no scientific rationale. In fact, anti-rationale, given the amount of Sitch's own publications. I have summoned the Croat here. Anthony's here. I'm just going to defend his real countryman. I'm just Albanian. But Sitchich, has published his own literature for 30 years in all low-quality journals, might I add. Never did he get a major journal to substantiate his claims. And Pliva, who's a Serbian, Croatian, I think, drug company, did do clinical trials of BPC, and they decided not to move forward with it. So, to me, BPC is just this really insane self-delusion, where people are taking the anecdote stuff and running with it. But anybody who's been in pharma forever knows that you always, every few years, you get a trial where the people are telling you, the doctors tell you, Martin, all the people on this drug think that in the double-blind trial think they know they're on drug, not placebo. All the doctors think so. It's a shoo-in. It has really good data. Just wait for this phase 3. You invest, you get the phase 3 data. Guess what? Placebo did better than drug. And you lose all your money, and you learn the lesson the hard way. And after 26 years of doing this, I can confidently tell you that it's very, very hard to take an N of 1 anecdote and think that it makes sense. In fact, we see all the time trials that had really good data in phase 2, and guys like Anthony who are very good at what they do. I would throw myself in there too, but Anthony's even better in finding these little tiny, seemingly inconsequential red flags, and then realizing that red flag actually contributed to the failure of the medicine. And those little tiny signs are very subtle, and they take a lifetime of work to find out. So the random anecdotes of people kind of are the last, go into like the last place of evidence. And the first place I like to start, if you ever read any of my papers on drug discovery, is at the drug discovery side. No molecule works by accident. It has to do something in the body. And if you can't find out where is it doing that something, and Citrus doesn't have an answer. The Taiwanese guys don't have an explicit answer. Some people say angiogenesis, which is not a great word to use around cancer people. You don't want an angiogenic peptide. That sounds terrible. That should be banned right away if that's true. You have to start with the mechanism, because if you can't tell me how it works, the best answer is that it doesn't. Now, again, is it possible that we don't know? Yeah, sure, thalidomide worked that way. A couple of other drugs. We still don't really know how even aspirin works. But for 90% of the 6,300 FDA-approved drugs, for 98 or 99% of them, we know exactly how they work. And in fact, increasingly, we design them to work that way. In the past, we sort of guessed and took drugs from rainforests and drugs from the human biome and other biomes and chucked them into trials and guessed. Today, we use precision tools, including computer simulations and things like that, to make exact drugs that do exactly what we want. And those days of random peptide nobody's discovered, they're never going to fully go away. But people like me do get excited about those drugs, buy them, license them, synthesize them, and do clinical trials. Nobody's done that with BPC for a reason. It's just not that exciting. There's nothing there that screams to me, I got to go raise 20 million from Peter Thiel and go do a clinical trial. Nothing in that, as somebody who's a professional at this, tells me that. But again, I'm willing to hear anybody who likes BPC to give me their story.
So,
right before I do, I just wanted to add one
gosh.
thing there. For BPC, what I saw was the mechanism of action. It's disputed. Like there's like 4 different theories, and there's not even much of a cellular phenotype difference that you can demarcate. Like this is exactly what's happening. So it kind of seems like it's even more murky than even some of the drugs of last century. I just wanted to mention that before.
Well,
I could just say I've taken it and it really did nothing for me.
Yeah, and let me ask you this, psychologically, why'd you take it?
Because they were selling it on discount when I was buying my other supplements. Yeah, pretty much.
So if you were allowed to go into any Dwayne Reed or CVS or Walgreens, you would just clear out the shelves and try them out, one by one to see if you did better?
If it was a good deal, sure. But as you said, there's a lot of marketing, right? There's a lot of supposed benefits, but yeah, it didn't do anything for
I
me.
mean, there's benefits to Rituxan, there's benefits to dupilumab. Like, you're not curious to take any of those drugs? They actually do.
They didn't show up on my feed.
Of course. Go ahead,
So,
Dempsey. Thanks for being patient.
I am. I actually needed to take BBC. I guess I don't know if I'm the best person. I am one of the idiots who talked about. I did take BPC last year. Last year I was a senior in high school. My entire basketball career, I played basketball my entire life growing up, and I developed chronic knee issues. And my junior year, I had to sit out a lot of the year. I missed a lot of practices. I ended up being able to play in the end of the season. But going into my senior year, I knew I needed to make a change. So I guess went on the internet and tried to do my research. And I landed on BPC partially because of Andrew Huberman and some of the other people I followed. And I took that my entire basketball season, and maybe it was placebo. I know you talked about how powerful placebo is, but I got multiple horrible ankle sprains, which I recovered from quite fast. I mean, my ankle was super swelled up, black and blue, and I didn't have any knee problems, which I was super happy about.
I mean, I played basketball not at your level. You're a big dude. You probably played for a really good school. I played for like Division 7 high school, and but when you're 15, 16, 17, I mean, you're an absolute unit. You're gonna not have knee problems. They're gonna come and go. I think if you were 60, my sister, for example, has had some severe bone issues. if you need a knee replacement or hip replacement, that's one thing. But you're a teenager, you know, you were,
Yeah.
you know, you're gonna bounce back from that stuff faster than most, and you might have had a severe knee injury that took some time to recuperate. And you know, I don't believe that you can say that it was BPC and not just your youthful self rejuvenation.
I I think you're totally correct. It could have been totally a coincidence. I mean, I'm not being sarcastic there.
Yeah, it's hard to say,
But
right? I mean, it's unless you could make a perfect clone of yourself and then give
yeah,
give that guy an injectable placebo, not a normal placebo, it had to be injected the same exact way into the exact other Dempsey, you know, then perhaps you could you even then only two patients, right? Randomness can not tell you, can be very confusing. So a 400 or 500 patient study doing BPC and sports injury recovery, totally doable, and FDA would approve it. I mean, that's a serious illness. Injury recovery is totally measurable. It doesn't have to be sports injury. It could be elderly people recovering from falls. It could be broken bones. I mean, there's an unending number of places this could be used medicinally. So why doesn't somebody just do it? And that's the question. And the answer is multifold. I mean, one of the simplest answers is, well, I don't know what the mechanism is. As a drug guy, that bothers me. I don't want to
yes,
do a trial if you can't show me a picture of the drug doing what it's doing, which is what crystallography is. I want to see the photo. Without the photo, I'm not interested in putting 50 million bucks down, because I could put 50 million bucks down in something where I do have a photo. And then you might say, well, I also don't want anecdotal evidence. I mean, one guy telling me it worked great for him, what am I supposed to do with
yeah,
that? Bet 50 million bucks? That seems like and anyone who has done that learns the hard way that you don't get success that way. You have to have a rational perspective. Now, could it still be working somehow? Yes. And my guess is, due to the fever pitch about this, the huge amounts of conversation around this, we are going to get a trial someday that shows it. But I do think it was in a Crohn's study, and the company who did the yeah. Go ahead, Dempsey.
Oh, I also had something to say about retatrutide. Um, I again, 19, probably not so smart. I chose not to pursue college basketball. I'm talking about my previous experience playing basketball, but I've gotten into lifting weights a lot recently. And after I graduated, I put on quite a bit of weight bulking. And I have done aggressive cuts before where I did not take any supplements like this. But about a month and a half ago, I chose to hop on retatrutide. And in 6 weeks, I've lost 36 pounds. And I guess I've had a pretty positive experience with it. I have had some negative side effects. I know this is all anecdotal and it probably doesn't matter to
Well, no,
you. I just
retatrutide
felt
works.
like,
I mean, it is.
yeah, I guess I just felt like I had to. Everyone in the space so far hasn't really done some of these, I guess, drugs. So I guess I had to add my
Yeah, I
opinion.
think some people have, and I think if you make retatrutide successfully, and these offshore manufacturing shops, I mean, they are experts sometimes at what they do. The good ones
Hmm.
can make it. So if you get your hands on that and you take it, you should lose weight. I mean, it would be very strange if you didn't. But at the same time, you're a healthy guy. You're doing it for this, working out, and something a little bit different from what the rest of us might need that drug for, where losing huge amounts of weight is, depending on your goal. If, as a bodybuilder, if you do it as, can you just go on mute? Your mic's feedbacking for me. The bodybuilding stuff is, I don't know that those drugs are great for that, but at the same time, like, you're free to do whatever you want. And you know there's nothing wrong with being curious or trying something. I think your risk reward is not great. I wish we could switch spots. I'm 43 and out of shape. I would love to stomp up and down the court again. But ultimately, it's in your hands. And I think that's one of the beauties of America, that I struggle with discussing this stuff, because I do think people should be free to do whatever they want. I do think that people should have the chance to kind of experiment or try things. But I do also think that, you're smart enough to know that, like, taking a random drug like BPC, it's not really clear that you're going to even be able to tell that it was the thing that did it for you. Whereas for retatrutide, it's like, look, Lilly has made 2 of these or 3 of these already. They're making a new and improved version. The phase 3 trials all worked. Clearly, retatrutide works. The only puzzle is, did you get the real stuff? And then you lose a bunch of weight, so probably you got the real stuff. So I think it's very reasonable. But again, your own judgment on what drugs you could take, that's sort of the nature of the Constitution. You have these rights, and I think we should have those rights. But I also think that we have to balance it with, like, well, should we let people take these medicines, quote unquote, and then if they feel like they've gotten hurt, I'm sure there's somebody out there that the day they took the peptide, they died or got cancer or something like that, then they have the right to sue somebody or demand some kind of explanation. And we have that explanation with the FDA. And so you have to straddle these 2 boundaries of, like, eventually there's going to be people who, want, justice and want an explanation. And then there's people who want freedom. And there's something we have to do in between that works. Anthony is here. He is a drug expert.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
I joined about, I don't know, 20 minutes ago, so I hope I'm not repeating anything. But I think the point that you just made is like a really good one. Having a contract between a drug vendor, a drug manufacturer, and the patient is like super important to like protect not just the manufacturer, but like ultimately the patient, right? Like you want to know who is making this thing, how they're making it. You want to be able to audit them. And I'll say this, like as someone in this space who works pretty closely with mass spectrometry, which is definitely one of the main techniques that are used to like validate drug products. I've got friends who are in the CRO space, that's contract research organization space, like guys that get hired essentially to do mass spec work and test purity and this kind of thing. I know these guys like get a lot of inquiries from the vendors of these peptides. So like the guys that, are selling it to whoever, in the US, these people want to like try to make sure that things are up to snuff as well. But the reason that they're contacting, a CRO to do that work is because the actual manufacturer isn't doing that work. They're not sending like a clean bill of health for this manufactured product. And even if they are, maybe it's of questionable, reliability, right? And so there's always going to be this like specter of doubt surrounding like some kind of peptide that's manufactured wherever. And ultimately, the consequence of that is unaccountable. Like you as an individual, just don't have like a trail to go back to
I
and
really like that.
like you say, get justice, right?
Yeah.
And like this is and this happens even in actually FDA governed products.
Right.
For the record, like you guys can go read it. There's a really nice book on this topic called Little Bottle of Lies, which really clearly documents like a lot of these problems with certain manufacturing sites, in eastern part of the world.
Even FDA,
like in particular.
I won't say, this is the Kanye West, I won't say what part of the world it is.
Yeah.
It's India. But no.
What about like opiates, right? I mean, a lot of the big pharma drugs, like they are not accountable to people when they've had horrible, effects of these drugs, right? So I
What
think
do
the
you mean they're
blind
not
trust.
accountable?
Well, no, I mean,
what do you mean they're not accountable?
Well, Purdue had to file for bankruptcy.
And
I mean,
they're
these
also
guys have to
rich,
face
right?
the music.
All the Sacklers are still billionaires.
Well, I think.
Well, sure, but that's not the point here. The point is that the patients and the patient communities also like have recourse.
They have recourse.
They have advocacy.
They did, and Purdue, and that is just one extreme. Vioxx was another extreme where Merck simply paid $6 billion in what I feel was one of the most egregious cases, probably worse than opioids, because it's Merck. Purdue is a small family-owned company that went obviously ham on their one product they had, and they were actually a struggling company for a long time until they hit it out of the park with OxyContin, and obviously went crazy with it. But opioids do work. I mean, they are very useful, and in fact, doctors now have such an allergy to opioids, they don't want to be in jail.
Totally fair, but for that 10-year period, they were telling people they're not addictive, and that was what was wrong, right?
Well, sure, but saying that they're not addictive, saying that they're not, that they're working too good, essentially, or something like this, is a lot different than like not making a pure product and telling everyone you're making a pure
Well,
product, and then not holding
look,
anyone accountable for that, right? Like that's very different.
Purdue did something
And
terrible. The company had to go bankrupt. Many people were sued. Many doctors who had to be, intelligent about prescribing drugs, they went to the dark side and they started becoming pill mills. There's a lot of blame to share. But one thing's for certain, it's like Anthony said, there is an address and a person you could sue. Now, whether or not, like you said, there was that satisfactory. A lot of people wanted to see somebody go to jail. A lot of people wanted to see the drug taken off the market. There at least was a way for Senate to investigate, for law enforcement to investigate, for the FDA to investigate, for doctors to make up their own mind. Here, we're taking the system and abstracting it away, and we're losing all the good things and only gaining bad things. We're gaining access to medicines that are not approved yet. Conceptually, that could be a good thing, but the problem is, like retatrutide, great medicine, likely to be one of the best-selling medicines of all time, which in my opinion means one of the best functional medicines of all time and efficacious and safe. But to get it today means you're getting it at the expense of Eli Lilly's intellectual property, which, again, who cares about Eli Lilly? It's $1 trillion company. But the only problem is if you keep doing that to Eli Lilly might stop making great drugs. And I think that's a serious risk. People don't, it's not like music. People don't make drugs for fun. They make them for profit. And, if the profit motive for drugs goes away, because the second you make, imagine, Anthony, the second a press release of a clinical trial result comes out, China starts whipping it up and making it for nothing. That destroys the pharma industry, right?
Maybe
yeah,
we need a new
I
business
agree.
model.
Well, the business model is actually pretty good. Like, it's actually made us incredibly healthy over time. We've invented literally thousands of really wonderful new medicines. We fight off cancer today better than we ever have in the history of the world. Like, things are ultimately improving
And
pretty consistently at a good pace.
And
Well,
China's
I
I don't think
agree,
there's any
but
problem with that.
it's
China's
clearly under attack, isn't it?
China's also innovating.
Sure, you need to enforce the law.
Yeah,
I think that's the
China's also innovating quite a lot, and I think that they too don't want their patents disrespected. So I think the folks that are making these drugs under the table, it's a very risky thing to do, and more you're going to have. It's a nascent thing, but if I was the CEO of Eli Lilly, I'd go to President Trump and say, listen, you have to do something about this because there's a manufacturer in Vietnam that's doing this, and you want to go hit somebody with tariffs, hit them. All of these research chemicals, there's a way to investigate this stuff. It's not very hard.
But it's very selective enforcement, wouldn't you agree?
Correct.
Right? I mean, they're not going after anyone who's producing fentanyl and distributing it
Correct.
throughout the U.S.
I mean,
from China. That's
well, like that's kind of the problem with all this dark web stuff is that we don't have an address. Like, we don't know who's making it. We don't know where they're making it. We don't know who is making all this product. There's no paper
Well, I
trail,
will say
and
this.
people are supporting it because they're buying it. People want these access to the peptides, and I get it. But they're propping up a dark network.
Well, we don't have
that has no accountability.
We don't have the manpower to do it. But if I could drop 5,000 people into the FBI, there's only 3 or 4 non-extradition countries on this planet. The U.S. the long arm of the U.S. law is pretty long, and so if you're in Vietnam making this stuff, or Thailand, or Bangladesh, or like some country that is just doesn't give a crap. Arrest warrants in the U.S. can get executed and you can get extradited here. And I think that the problem is, again, making peptides in some of these countries can be very, very profitable and, is worth the risk for some people. The demand is here on this side. It's very hard to scan all the ports and all of the, sort of shipments in the world and make sure that there's no illicit sort of research chemicals coming across the border. It's a problem that doesn't seem like it'll be solvable, and people will only get more curious about this, especially with things like ChatGPT.
Yes, I
ChatGPT, is a tool where folks can go ahead. My girl left the chat, but she was one of the people who created ChatGPT. people can ask ChatGPT what medicine might work for me, and you might all of a sudden say, okay, well, ChatGPT says this drug was never FDA approved, but I might be able to buy it online, and it might help me. And now we've all become doctors. I made fun of the Reddit crowd a minute ago. Obviously, the wisdom of a large amount of collective people can often be pretty good, but now with AI, everyone's got a super doctor in their pocket, and probably not hard to actually start to go down this road, especially after biopharma companies, stuff that Anthony and I look at daily, they come out with a phase 2 trial. The phase 2 trial looks good. That was when retatrutide started being created, not phase 3, just after phase 2. And so you can make anything that pharma patents, because the patent, by its definition, is a document that teaches how to exploit an invention. So it has the molecule in it, and even often will have synthesis steps in it. So patents are disclosures of inventions. And so what's to stop people from just saying, oh, I want to do that phase 2 drug without being even on the trial? I don't have to worry about whether I'm on placebo or not. I'm just getting it tomorrow. And people, this kind of actually imperils the clinical trial system to some extent, right? Like if this is what happens, then who gets to be on a clinical trial? That's kind of a risky thing I think folks haven't thought about either. And I don't know. To me, it's in some ways like what Max said on the debate was that the genie is not going back in the bottle is probably not wrong. I mean, what are you going to do about whacking a mole, whacking every mole in the planet, every little peptide manufacturer is it's not really feasible, is it?
I just want to make the second point of this, which was basically that accountability and having a paper trail is like a big deal that I think is not really talked about much in this peptide conversation. But the second point is simply that you don't know like what you're getting, like even if they tell you what they're giving you. Like in the case of BPC 157, like I looked at it a little bit as well, and I mean, I think a lot of people have concluded the thing is angiogenic. It is definitely a cancer risk if you extrapolate from that
In
data. And
animals,
so it's not
in mouse studies.
in people. Listen, you don't know that it isn't. I don't know that it is, but like it's a certain risk, and this is the entire point of having a randomized clinical trial is that you actually get to test for these things, hold people accountable in a clinical trial setting, and then ultimately de-risk these issues.
I mean,
Like, look, I was just looking
imagine.
at a company. I was just looking at a company the other day. This company fights cancer. Really nice drug. Really beats back cancer. Wonderful drug. However, there is a risk to this drug. It gives you colitis. Colitis is like a really bad side effect. You might have to get a colostomy, get your colon taken out. You might have to deal with like chronic diarrhea every fucking day of your life for the next 5 years until you die of cancer. Like it's a horrible condition to have to deal with. But some people would rather have that than have cancer. So it's informed consent. If you have
Well,
informed consent, this goes away. But like we're not
imagine
getting that with BPP 157 and
right.
in these other agents.
Right. Imagine our poor friend Dempsey, high school basketball player, takes BP 157 and he's giving himself angiogenic factor. He gets liver cancer, kidney cancer at 23. What a terrible, sad story that is. And it does happen regardless, but why so unnecessarily? For what? For a unproven attempt to make a sore go away that will go away on its own.
I
Like,
agree,
and
and
this is the
that's
kind
why
of stuff that gets.
BPC we can
Okay,
all agree is bullshit, right? But what about these
sure.
breakthrough medicines like Retta, where it's life saving, right? Like it's just like breakthrough cancer
It's not
medicines, right?
life
There are
saving,
people that
Melon. It really
participate.
isn't.
Again, for the severely obese people that cannot get bariatric surgery, their
It's not
A1C
life
is
saving for
12
them
plus.
either.
They
You got to
they have
talk to.
triglyceridemia. They have triglycerides above 7,000. These are real humans walking around planet Earth right now, especially in the U.S. And if they just took Retta for 6 months, they'd basically be healthy.
I think,
Manjaro
This
has
is
huge
yeah.
effects though. Like it really Retta, like I take Retta, right? So that's what I was going to pivot into is that Martin, I'm your
Same.
villain. I'm the person who is absolutely doing this as a healthy person because it's intentionally on the pursuit of superhuman. And as we see, we're going forward. But like Manjaro works incredibly well. The availability of Manjaro and my brother-in-law, who I talk to quite a bit, is a very, very successful bariatric surgeon who prescribes lots of GLP-1s. Like appropriately dosed Manjaro for the obese is highly useful. People above 400 pounds, they put them on GLP-1s, but they're not going to sufficiently benefit. So it's actually inspired an entire new research line of bariatric surgery for the ultra obese, because you simply cannot lose enough weight for, the people who's 600 pounds, right? These people exist. That's who bariatric surgeons end up treating. And they have to have a variety of factors. But the interjection that I wanted to make is, Martin, you touched on a lot of who are these people who are doing it for fun. I'm one of them. I've been, since, I don't know, 2007, basically buying experimental drugs, taking them in the pursuit of superhuman stuff. The logic for me is that it's, I spend quite a bit of time trying to figure out exactly what I'm doing and why. I have been trying to push the envelope for myself for a really long time, and I kind of see the future of cosmetic drugs, like you said, what cosmopharmacology is exactly going to be a growing arm of medicine, or don't even have to call it medicine, whatever, call it chemical synthesis. And for me, it's a hobby, but it's incredibly fascinating. It's incredibly, frankly, fun, and it is part of this pursuit for me of eventually getting to what is a superhuman physiology, which we're going to get to, right? Like, if I could right now, I'd be paying people to synthesize
Right.
drugs. And
Yeah,
like,
and there's
that would be
nothing
the next
wrong.
fun thing to do.
There's nothing wrong with that. To the same extent, there's nothing wrong with smoking weed or doing something like that, as long as you understand the risks and you want to do it, and it's in your self-determined interest to do so. I think that's great. I guess where I get uncomfortable is probably around the places where people promote it or make
Yeah.
money from it. Those kinds of things are a little bit less
I think you shouldn't
clear.
be selling to normies. Like, frankly, I've been told this bunch of times that it is a patronizing view, but like, having a barrier to entry for this stuff for the casual participant is actually really important. Like, there should be, at least to me, a layer of esotericism around it that stops the people who are not passionately interested in figuring out for themselves how it works, because I don't want them to get hurt. And like,
Yeah.
we're going to get deaths soon from especially women who have anorexia taking Retta,
Right.
right? Like, that's going to be the first peptide deaths that we're going to get, and it's going to be bad because there's people who found that they can turn off their Hugner signals, and they're going to stack whatever amylin, analogs and Retta.
Right, and this is what a doctor will not refill your prescription without seeing you regularly. And the doctor makes money that way. But that's a good thing, because if you walk in 87 pounds as a young lady and he looks at you and says, "What the F? I'm taking you off of this. I made a horrible mistake putting you on this in the first place. I need you to gain some weight, and there's no way I'm refilling this prescription." That's the kind of checks and balances that a doctor's there for. We're talking about Purdue earlier. I have again, I'm pro pharma. I'm not pro Purdue per se, but I routinely pointed out at the time, and I'll point out now, that physicians were just as responsible for Purdue, in my mind, as the drug companies. Now, the drug company. Now, I think Purdue did something horrible, and they really violated their contract with society, but the doctors did too, because the doctors are not stupid. They know
Spot on.
they know opioids are addicting. Thousands of years of medicine have told us that. You have to use them sparingly. You don't use super powerful opioids for people, that you haven't known for a long time, that you don't trust as a doctor. You have to build trust with your patient. And it's the kind of thing that led to an epidemic, and doctors lost their licenses. There are a lot of doctors in jail that I met that, were there because they wrote tons of opioid prescriptions. And I think that, we learned something from that. So to take all those learnings and throw them away, and say, to hell with the doctor, to hell with the FDA, to hell with the drug companies. We don't need any of them. Well, again, if you're Balaji or yourself or somebody like that, Peter Thiel, you got tons of advisors, you're really smart, you got a lot of money. Yeah, you know what? It's no different in fact, I would say it's a lot better than taking weed or cocaine or, something like that. I mean, you have the right to do that, in my opinion, even though the government says you don't. That's your choice. It's your body. you know what the risks and benefits are. Wanting to take weird medicines, I mean, if anything, that's a lot less destructive than taking heroin or cocaine or something. And you're trying to better yourself, so why not? All the more power to you, I think. But I also,
And that's my point.
yeah.
Like, it's not like these people, like, I understand the whole fear argument. Like, yes, there are consequences, right? And people should have informed consent going into this. And I do actually like the point that that someone made earlier about there being a barrier to entry and there being a little bit of friction. Like, all those points are valid. But I think at the end of the day, like, ultimately, the opposing side who's saying the Reddit gray market needs to be shut down is based on a misplaced sense of fear that people are going to be going down like flies. Where are these dead people? Where are all the
Dude,
people dying from Chinese peptides? Where,
retatrutide,
like, why do we not hear about these cases?
retatrutide is a great drug. It's going to be one of the biggest selling drugs ever, but it's not a public good. Why do you keep thinking that it's just for anybody can take it just for shits and giggles? It's Eli Lilly property, dude.
Right. I'm just saying that the human cost is quite high right now of letting these people die. I get that the patents protect profits. They don't necessarily protect human lives. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think you have a fundamental misunderstanding of endocrinology. Nobody's dying because they can't get it retatrutide. Nobody's going to survive because they got retatrutide over Mounjaro. Like, I just don't think obesity works that way. Again, I maybe need to be educated
But
by an endocrinologist, but I know some endos, and I don't know. Anthony, Anthony's a drug guy. I'm curious what Anthony thinks, but I think it's a pretty hard claim to make that anybody's dying because retatrutide. This is not cancer, bro.
uh,
It's it's
can I
it's
just
a
put
very
in? I think the demographics kind of wrong. I don't think people who are getting it right now are majorly people who are like who have obesity issues. I think they're getting what's available, just like Manjaro. I really think the people who are going for Retta are the guys who like trying to shred, who tries to kind of get ripped. Uh, like the looks maxing crowd, the guys who are more experimental, willing to try shit.
It's just not
Uh,
true. There's tons of obese people taking it. You guys have to join the Reddit for Retatrutide. There's
I was
142,000
one
weekly
of
active
I,
users, and
I
tons of
was
them
one
are
of the first
obese.
I was one of the first people there. A lot of people forget that I'm the fucking bro, the pharma bro. I know more about these drugs than anybody. And at the end of the day, obesity isn't that dangerous. That it's not cancer. You can live as 300, 400 pounds for decades without any impact. And some of these people have normal HbA1cs. And there are interventions. You're wildly overstating how severe that situation is and how common it is.
yeah,
But
I think they're more concerned about getting ripped than being obese.
1/3 of the U.S. has prediabetes. Another third has diabetes. The only
Yeah,
only
dude,
a
they can
third
take.
doesn't have
What do you think they
prediabetes.
can do?
So
Do
they
you
all have
think
high A1Cs, right?
do you think metformin doesn't exist? Do you think diet and exercise don't exist? Do you think GLPs were like God's gift to the world? Like, were
I'm saying
GLPs
that
first?
most of these people are disqualified from surgery because their A1C is too high.
No, surgery is extreme. Nobody needs surgery. But you can take metformin and insulin and other things to lower your A1C. And most people with obesity don't have elevated A1C.
But why take
So
insulin anymore if you can manage your blood glucose using retatrutide and avoid all the negatives of insulin?
you can take Mounjaro. You don't need to take unapproved drugs.
But
Just take
if you're
Mounjaro.
like
It
a
works great.
bodybuilder type and you care about keeping your muscle, you want to take Reddit right now.
Well, those people are a different story. They're not in any despair. Um,
They're not, but I feel they're the majority of people who are experimenting with it right now.
again, nobody knows. We don't have that data. I do
Or
think there's
just from my experience, yeah.
some in column A, some in column B. There's plenty of overweight people that are desperate for something, and they also don't want to pay for for Mounjaro, right? They don't want
Yes,
to
the
pay
price
for
barrier is a huge
Ozempic.
contributor, right?
So just like the person who doesn't want to pay for music, they can go find a torrent or listen to it on YouTube. This is the equivalent of that. It's piracy.
Pirate's gonna pirate.
And, I'm not going to judge somebody for being a pirate. If they can't afford it, it's not a horrible way to go because it is a pain in the ass, right? I mean, you got to go do all this bullshit. Whereas just getting a prescription, if you're really 300 pounds, I mean, you can get a retatrutide prescription and you can ask for it by name when it's FDA approved. But for now, you know, Mounjaro will serve those patients just fine. You have deep and continued weight loss with Mounjaro. It's not like, you know, I mean, you can go all the way back to normal with that drug. I don't see the need for, you know, this drug or that drug that quickly. Andre.
The, oh. Hey, really interesting discussion here, including the TVPN. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about and just kind of discuss was you'd mentioned that peptides have the worst pharmacological properties compared to, let's say, small molecules versus antibodies. And I think in the body of evidence, obviously, there are a lot more FDA-approved small molecules and antibodies from, last 45, 60 years. And yet I disagree with that point to some extent in looking at, for example, triple agonist peptides. That's a very difficult mechanism of action to attain with a small molecule. And with an antibody, I mean, good luck getting good GPCR signaling at a lot of these receptors. So that's one of the points. Don't really want to argue the BPC versus retrotrutide. I think that's a little bit of, people are going to take it one way or the other if they have access to it and if they hear something on a forum. That's separate from something that's like intellectual property availability, which I very much agree, should be defended. And yet there is this balancing act of accessibility and people wanting to try the new thing, or bodybuilders are going to take steroids or going to take things like that. So, I mean, this could be a 2-hour discussion, but those were just some of the starting points.
Yeah, I think we beat the Retta horse to death a little bit here. Why
Yeah.
don't we switch gears a tad? Retta, my wife uses it. She has, excellent results with it. BPC, I've also been kind of scared of that one just because of the whole cancer aspect that it could help, grow cancer cells. But the two that I'm doing right now are NAD plus and then the CJC 1295 and ipamorelin blend. I know we were talking about half-life earlier. My understanding is with the blend, the half-life is extended. And, I could definitely say it's not a placebo effect because the results are very visual. There's, fat loss, there's muscle gain. It's not debatable. We haven't really talked about those two. And with the NAD plus, I've also noticed a boost in energy, memory a little bit. I'm 50 years old, just turned 50 here this last summer. Those are the only two that I'm currently taking. Haven't spoke about those too much, but I would like to open up the discussion to those.
Well, that's actually a really interesting transition point because if you look at CJC with DAC, that's something that binds to serum albumin. So you end up with a peptide that effectively can last for a week, right? So this argument that, hey, a peptide short-lived or the distribution's terrible. I mean, there's so many examples of peptides actually distributing deeper into tissues. They don't get stuck on the outside of tissues. You can engineer them in more interesting ways than just like the FC domain of an antibody extending the circulation for sometimes months. But you don't always want months. Sometimes